Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2015-16 Pflaum Memorial Lecture. I'm subbing for Dr. Stephen Catt tonight, who is our department chair. And this afternoon he had to drive to Liberty, Missouri to get a root canal. I think he would have preferred to have been here. He would have said something very witty and very wise, and he would have shared some remarkable stories about his memories of Dr. Pflaum. But there's a bio on the program, so we invite you to read that. It's my pleasure to introduce a man who will introduce our speaker tonight. I'm happy to welcome Tyler Curtis to the Frederick Theater. Tyler is the director of our alumni organization, and a few years ago, tonight's speaker was awarded an Outstanding Recent Graduate Award, but he was working on a show on Broadway and unable to come back and receive that award. So things worked out in a nice way, and Tyler is going to present that award tonight and then introduce our speaker. So please welcome Tyler Curtis.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bartrup, and thanks for all being here to this Pflaum lecture. It's a great annual tradition. Our theater department obviously does a wonderful job every year of coordinating this all out. We're appreciative of all of our students being here tonight, as well as our patrons. Like Jim said, this tonight's speaker is a special one to us because of this award. Now, I didn't have time beforehand for makeup. I have no idea if the lights are good on me now or not, so I apologize for that, Ben. I know that when I wear this color sometimes I get ridiculed because it looks like the wrong school. I assure you I wore it tonight because of a theater former professor and an alum himself, Charlie Hill, who always said, keep it light, bright, tight, and lavender. So that's the rationale for that. But Ben certainly is one of our outstanding alums, one of our very alum that we're very proud of. This Outstanding Recent Graduate Award is awarded to an alumnus who has graduated in the last 10 years, which actually Ben graduated from here in 2005, so he was actually still be eligible this year. But he was awarded this in 2010, and like Jim said, he was kind of busy. He went from here to Boston University to work on his MFA, and then to New York to work in theater there, and now he's out in California. He's worked for the LA Ballet, as well as now an instructor at Pepperdine University, which most of us have kind of heard of because Pepperdine's kind of a big deal. So we're really happy to have Ben back. I know he spent a lot of time in classes yesterday and today and did a Q&A session with our students. It's a privilege for us to have alumni come back and share their experiences and impart to our current students and to our faculty who help them, as well as our faculty who are here now, the value of an ESU degree. And by all means, Ben exudes the top-notch example of what it is to be a Hornet and an alumnus. So please welcome Ben Pilat. I have to give you, about 5 years late, your award as an Outstanding Recent Graduate.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you. 17 years ago, a college student in Laramie, Wyoming, was brutally murdered because of his sexual orientation. When I was a student here, I helped bring his story to life. I was the assistant lighting designer, and that was the first time I felt just how powerfully light is linked to emotion. I am a storyteller, but unlike an actor who uses their voice and their body, my medium is light. Lighting designers reveal a lot of things in the stories we tell. We tell you where you are. We tell you the time of day and the time of year. We tell you whether the world you see is just like your own, or if it is a heightened place, a magical place, or an ethereal place. We tell you where to look, and sometimes how to feel about what you see. We set the pace, hold the tension, and even subtly tell you when to breathe. And sometimes we can do all of that without you even knowing. The word manipulate sometimes has a negative connotation, but I love the power it implies. Jules Fisher, one of the most successful lighting designers in the world, was a magician early in his life, and so was I. And he's talked a lot about the power of magic, just like the power of light, to create illusions that tell stories. But what is light? It's energy that's everywhere, all around us, all the time. Everything you might know of as electromagnetic radiation, radio waves, X-rays, gamma rays, ultraviolet, infrared, microwaves, they are all the same thing. But we have an organ that is tuned in to one specific little range of that spectrum, and we call that visible light. And everything we know, everything we call different colors, they are all just different, slightly different vibrating frequencies of that same thing. That is the medium that I sculpt with and that I paint with. And paradoxically, it takes thousands of pounds of equipment to produce, and yet it weighs nothing. A few years ago, I was the assistant lighting designer for a Spanish puppet opera directed by Moises Kaufman, the playwright and director who created the Laramie Project, along with his collaborators at the Tectonic Theater Project. One night at dinner, I worked up the courage to tell him the effect that his work had on my career path, and I thanked him for helping me feel how impactful theater can be, and for helping me understand the important role that light has to play in that experience. And I'm beginning to learn that Moises and I share a curse that many theater artists endure: the ability to see everything that's wrong. In some ways, that's required training for a lighting designer. During tech, I always have to evaluate the stage picture with a critical eye. Is that too bright, too dark, too saturated, too flat? Is that gobo too sharp? How can I get rid of that flare on the border? Should that cue be faster or called sooner? On rare occasions, I feel like I've finished lighting a show. More often, as Jules Fisher would say, it just opens. Time in the theater is precious, and there are a lot of people on the clock waiting while I write light cues. In order to set my creative mind up for success, my technical mind has to do a lot of work first. Ron Folks, who taught here for decades and was my first lighting teacher, had a number of delightful expressions. And one of them was, "A light does what a light does." And that translates to, it's my job, it's my responsibility to know my tools and to pick the right one for a specific purpose. As a problem solver, I spend a lot of time staring at a computer screen trying to figure out, how am I going to get a light there? The bubble of space that surrounds this theater is the same bubble of space that surrounds every theater. These are the only lighting angles there are. There aren't any other ones. And unfortunately, nobody has invented a way yet for two objects to occupy the same space at the same time. So I'm collaborating with, or competing with, all the other theater artists who need equipment and scenery and space to do their jobs. And sometimes I'm competing with myself, because I can only fit so many lights, which translates into a certain number of ideas, onto a single lighting pipe. The rules of physics that apply to you are the same ones that apply to me. There is nothing I can do to get a hard-edged beam out of a Fresnel, for example. But the choices aren't only that simple anymore. Lighting rigs are turning into complex control networks with dizzying and constantly changing variety of consoles, automated fixtures, and LEDs that are increasingly integrated with the control systems for projections, sound, and automation. But despite all of this new technology, the essence of lighting design hasn't changed. Every stage picture is still based on the same 5 controllable properties of light: intensity, angle, color, movement, and form. Form being a combination of shape and size and texture. Those are the tools. Or, if we look at it from the perspective of a chef, the ingredients. those ingredients, which are readily available to anyone, are combined in a delicate balance that creates an artistic meal. A bland porridge, like the one served in the human world of The Matrix, will meet the calorie and nutrient requirements of the human body, but it doesn't provide any artistry or vision or excite your senses. Similarly, it doesn't take much know-how to illuminate a stage. If you hang a couple of floodlights on the balcony rail, you will see all of the action of the play. But you won't see visual poetry. Because the trickier part of an effective lighting design is knowing what not to light. When I'm not satisfied with a cue, the most common solution isn't turning on more lights, it's figuring out what I can turn off. That's a mistake I made as a young designer. When an experienced director would tell me, "I can't see their faces, can you make it brighter?" That's what I would do. It's a sentence that does two things at once. It defines a problem, "I can't see their face," and it proposes a solution, "Can you make it brighter?" Because for most directors with a limited lighting vocabulary, intensity is the easiest thing to understand. But if an actor has raccoon eyes because the front light angle is too steep, making that light brighter isn't going to solve the problem. Maybe the background is too bright compared to the scene. Maybe it's my color choices that aren't working. The problem is that the director can't see their faces, and it's my job to figure out how to fix that. And it's my job to speak the director's language. It's not the director's job to speak mine. I was assisting a well-known designer at New York Theater Workshop, and we were in tech with a director. We had just come back from a break, and all of a sudden the director wasn't happy with the light cues we were writing. We tried making some adjustments, but it seemed like nothing that we were doing was working. And we fumbled around for at least 10 minutes before my designer pointed out that the director had gone outside during the break and had come back in and was still wearing his sunglasses. Needless to say, that cleared up a lot of those problems. I spent 6 years as the lighting director for Los Angeles Ballet, and one of the high points of that career was taking the Nutcracker to the Dolby Theater, formerly the Kodak Theater, which is the home of the Oscars every year. There is a transition in that ballet where the party scene is revealed by a bleed through the hallway scrim. And during dress rehearsals, the artistic director would come over to me, he would lean over, he would put his hands on the table, and he would say, "This has to glow!" I had to learn his communication style. He wasn't angry, and I wasn't failing as a lighting designer. That was just how he expressed the passion and intensity of what he wanted to feel in that moment. Being an artist is my favorite part, but I'm also part manager. I deal with budgets, financial and otherwise. I think back to high school chemistry class and the concept of a limiting reactant. What is in shortest supply? Is it money or something else? It could be time or space or lights or dimmers or labor or skill. I need to understand union rules. I need to know that we have to finish focusing all of the lights before we can break down to the smaller show crew. I need to know how many electricians are required to be at the bottom of a genie lift. I'm also a scheduler, navigating my own production schedule and the schedules of those I work with. I negotiate the use of notes time on stage with other departments. I'm a communicator, both of larger artistic ideas and of the specific technical information required to implement those ideas. I fill a number of other roles at various stages of the production process, such as draftsman, lighting database manager, and archivist. Those are all jobs that Emporia State University helped train me to do as part of my liberal arts education. During the day, I learned about theater in the classroom. In the afternoon, I honed those skills in the scene shop and the costume shop. In the evenings, I applied what I was learning to the work of creating productions on ESU stages. I took an interest in my own education. During one slow tech, I sat backstage in that storage closet, and I read the Express 250 manual cover to cover. When I was a follow spot operator in Albert Taylor Hall, I read a lighting design textbook. In between cues, of course, I'm not a great multitasker. I spent a summer preparing to enter a lighting design in a KC ACTF competition. But I didn't just learn about theater. Because of a liberal arts education, a style of education that some people are losing an appreciation for, I was challenged to engage the world in a number of different subjects. Because when I talk to a director, we're very rarely talking about theater. We're talking about the kinds of things that we do theater about. Things like history and literature and politics and art and emotion and psychology and philosophy. Rather than teach me the answers to a specific set of problems, my liberal arts education taught me to solve problems myself, an important skill to have when every show presents its own unique set of challenges. Those are skills I continued to develop when I was a graduate student at Boston University. And they sent me into the lion's den for my very first project. 1 month after school started, I was teching King Lear, starring the amazing Elvin Epstein, and I was the grad student lighting design guinea pig in a new relationship between a professional upstart theater company and Boston University Theater. To complicate matters, we weren't in a theater. We were in a 2-story stone room with a massive staircase and pillars with car mechanic gargoyles as their capitals, calling back to the year 1930 when this Boston University property was a luxury car showroom. Being in this found space meant there were none of the things that normal theaters come stocked with, like lighting positions, or light boards, or lights, or dimmers, or electricity. So what did I have? I had a couple $100 and a weird tile shower room filled with parts of things that used to be lighting instruments. I would have told you that I was absolutely not ready to design a show like King Lear. And I wasn't. But I did it anyway, and it turned out okay. I begged and borrowed lights. I built dimmers from Home Depot parts. I ran extension cords from different parts of the building to get enough electricity for an eclectic mix of fluorescent lights, some of the first LEDs, clip lights, and just a couple source 4s. That very stressful few months of my life left me with a 1-sentence mention in a Variety magazine review, which read, "Ben Pilat's non-traditional lighting, with lamps strung about the space, creates a playing area filled with shadows, mysteries, and light in surprising places. All apt imagery for a work that centers on blind ambition and sightless seers." It was a line that directly led to my first job with my future employer, mentor, and friend, David Lander, with whom I worked as an assistant and then associate lighting designer on dozens of shows across the country, including the Broadway productions of Masterclass and Bengal Tiger at the Baghdad Zoo, starring Robin Williams. Not all my shows in grad school were so sparsely equipped. That's one benefit a master's program will give you: the opportunity to design a show with a large rig, possibly hundreds of conventionals and dozens of moving lights, well before anyone would hire you to design a project of that size. It's an opportunity to hone your design skills, learn the rules so you can break them, and experiment in a place where failure feels just as real, but is far less damaging to your career. I'm incredibly grateful for the connections I made while I was a student. At BU, they flew me to Florida for a week to assist at Palm Beach Opera. I interned with Ken Billington on the pre-Broadway tryout of High Fidelity, an ill-fated musical that ultimately closed after less than a week on Broadway. I spent a semester-long internship working for New York City Lights, the television lighting design firm that began the trend of shows that look like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and SportsCenter and Iron Chef America. And grad school formed the trenches, where I formed relationships with my peers, a group of designers, directors, technicians, and actors I'm lucky to still work with occasionally, and who say nice things about me in a business that doesn't extend much further than friends of friends of friends. The more I worked professionally, and the more successful I became, the more I struggled with some of the unhealthier aspects of our business. The typical Broadway schedule is 8 a.m. to midnight, 6 days a week. Plan to arrive a little early and stay a little late, and factor in at least an hour, daily commute to a neighborhood you can afford. I don't function that well on the West Wing levels of sleep deprivation, and I couldn't begin to consider making healthy food choices during a short dinner break or setting foot in a gym to release stress. Those things are much more important to me now, and I try to find some level of balance in my work. I'm taking up surfing and yoga, and that makes me sound like a quintessential Californian, but I hope that it's making me a better, more expressive artist, as well as a better educator. In 2012, I accepted a full-time teaching position with Pepperdine University, shifting my primary focus to helping the next generation of theater artists find their voice. When I think back to the kinds of relationships I developed with Ron and Nancy and Jim and Sujay and Teresa and Amanda and all of the other faculty and staff members, it's an overwhelming honor to be in the position to provide that kind of support and encouragement to my own students. Now in my 4th year heading the production design program, I finally identify more as an educator than as a designer. And with little formal training as an educator, I'm thankful for the liberal arts education that helped me quickly adapt to a whole new set of challenges. Luckily, I had excellent role models. In addition to the ESU faculty and staff, I was influenced by one of the most patient, humble, intelligent, diplomatic, talented, and integrity-filled lighting designers in the business, Mark Stanley. I benefited tremendously from graduate school, and I wouldn't be where I am now without it. Now I'm in the position of helping my students navigate their options as they approach graduation. I'm asked about graduate school a lot, and my answer isn't automatically yes. Choosing whether or not to go to graduate school can be a difficult decision, and it's a rapidly changing equation as access to information grows exponentially. When I graduated in May of 2005, Facebook only had 2 million users. I want to get that right. And the first YouTube video had been posted just days before. 10 years later, Facebook has 1.5 billion monthly active users. And every minute, hundreds of hours of content are uploaded to YouTube. And while a sizable percentage of those videos fall in the category of hamsters eating tiny burritos, there are now free, detailed tutorials for nearly every piece of technology you will encounter. My point is that access to information is quickly becoming one of the least compelling reasons to earn a graduate degree in theater. If you identify as a craftsman or a technician or a stage manager as opposed to an artist, then grad school isn't a necessity for you. If you are self-motivated, excited about what you do, and commit to learning and improving your skills as a lifelong endeavor, then it's reasonable to move to almost any large city and start looking for work. It might be a slow start, but know that getting that first bit of work is the hardest part. Once you start meeting people and you're given the opportunity to demonstrate the work ethic that the Emporia State Theater faculty is committed to helping you cultivate, that first job will lead to the next, and the next, and the next. And at the end of 3 years, you will have a comparable education to someone who spent that amount of time getting an MFA, minus the student loans. Because despite the fact that this money magically appearing in your bank account is free, the people who loaned it to you are going to want it back, and they're going to get it. Most of them are willing to let you pay it back as slowly as you'd like. And while that feels super gracious, it's only because as each day passes, you owe a little more money. Both the government and private corporations are profiting either a little or a whole lot, depending on who's doing the accounting, from your loan-funded education. And that extra monthly cost that might equal a car payment or a mortgage payment is affecting real decisions your generation is having to make. It's also affecting hypothetical ones. Forbes magazine reported that 30% of respondents with an average of $30,000 in debt would sell an organ if it would wipe out that debt. I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for the graduate education I received and the connections I made at Boston University. And it happened to leave me $30,000 in debt, although I fall in the more cautious majority of people who would not sell an organ to pay it off. But I gave it some honest thought. You can live a full, healthy life without a spleen. But a splenectomy is a major surgical procedure. It carries some risk, and life without a spleen will leave you more vulnerable to infection unless you are part of the 10% of the population that has a second accessory spleen that can take over functions if your main spleen fails or is sold. Black market organs aside, I value the education I received much higher than the price I paid. Because for designers, for artists with a driving force to tell humanity's stories, 3 years of graduate school can give you a lot of things that 3 years working as a freelance designer in a new city can't. I put everything on hold to eat, breathe, dream, and occasionally stress dream about lighting design. Mark Stanley, Roger Meeker, Jim Noon, John Savage, and Brian Pratt took a kid from Kansas with a passion, and they helped me become a designer with the skills to succeed in the theater capital of the world, and ultimately to succeed as educators like themselves. One of them, and I won't say who, but he knows who he is, even taught me to endure an authority figure screaming at me in the middle of the house during intermission of second dress. I always assumed that working on Broadway was the dream, but the closer I got to it, I saw it wasn't my dream. For those people who are drawn to Broadway, it's an amazing place to work, and it has a lot of things in common with any theater, but it has some unique advantages. Broadway has exceptionally high standards. It has special people, more time, more money, more personnel selection, more specificity. You have the sway to rent exactly what you need. And it has the opportunity to invent. New products are created for Broadway shows, things like beam benders that are now out in the market for anyone to use. Working as an assistant in New York and across the country was like a second graduate school education. I watched shows develop from initial design meetings through tech, previews, and opening. I learned about the creative process, communication, collaboration, and workplace politics. I learned about union membership, negotiation and contracts, and writing professional emails. I learned to lead a crew, manage complex projects, process information, and make a plan. In many ways, being an ALD is akin to being a stage manager for the lighting department. Without the burden of making artistic decisions, I was free to focus my attention on providing the organization that helped implement the design and ensure that my designer, electrician, programmer, and stage manager all had the information they needed to succeed. It's a position that's been made necessary by the way we produce commercial theater in this country. Quickly and repeatably. Quickly, because when a show isn't open, it's not making any money, and those costs are adding up quickly. theater and equipment rental, crew labor, cast, orchestra, designer fees, and when overtime comes into play, staying 1 hour late could cost as much as I made in a month. Consequently, it's the job of a good assistant to keep everything moving. When I say repeatably, I'm mainly referring to the ability to transfer a show into a different theater. When a show is a hit, being able to reproduce your work is essential. And this isn't something we often encounter in educational theater, but some shows will tech out of town before transferring to Broadway. Other shows are remounted by different company years later. That was the case with Seance on a Wet Afternoon, a Stephen Schwartz opera that was originally produced by Opera Santa Barbara and was then remounted at New York City Opera and nearly had an Australian tour. That was also the case with Masterclass, originally part of a Terrence McNally play festival at the Kennedy Center. It was later transferred to Broadway and to London's West End. Oftentimes, it's the assistant's careful documenting of the light plot, paperwork, focus charts, cue sheets, and work notes that allows a show to smoothly transfer from one venue to another. In the early years of my career, assisting provided about 75% of my income, which paid my rent while I developed my own design career. As a young designer in an expensive city, it can be demoralizing to earn a couple $100s for a few weeks' work. But to some extent, it doesn't really matter how much your early designs pay. Look at those shows as investments in relationships, as an excuse to spend time with creative, talented peers. Use those shows to demonstrate what kind of a designer and collaborator you are, because word will get around. The theatrical community is shockingly small and well-connected. You've probably heard the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Realistically, it's some of both, but a more accurate version of that sentiment might be, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. At the end of the day, you are a small business owner, and your product is your technical or design services. When someone needs a designer or an assistant, you want to be the first person that comes to their mind. You want them to think, if I hire Ben, he'll do great work. He'll be prepared, focused, attentive, on time, and on budget. If you make building and maintaining relationships a priority, you'll make the leap from 3-digit design fees to 4-digit design fees, which is an important milestone for sustaining a career in the arts. I'm lucky to have had those experiences, and I'm lucky to be where I am now. As the arc of my career shifts from freelance designer to educator, the sense of peace that I've found my calling continues to grow. With every course I teach, my goal is to engage students with equal parts discussion-based lecture and hands-on projects that simulate professional conditions. Whether I'm teaching drafting, or stage management, or lighting design, or rendering, I create assignments and experiences that develop component skills, such as timing and scheduling, leadership, spatial reasoning, communication, teamwork, problem solving, etc. Then combine those components into midterm and final projects that require students to draw on each of those individual skills to be successful. As an example, the conceit of my stage management class is that each student has been hired to stage manage a production. Throughout the semester, we explore every phase of that process: resumes and interviewing, auditions, paperwork, rehearsal, tech, opening, and closing. In addition to a written final exam, students individually experience a stage management flight simulator, my nickname for a setup that recreates professional situation of calling cues from a booth, complete with cue lights, intercoms, and a rear projection screen displaying a fully produced musical on the window in front of them. I take student evaluations to heart, and I'm constantly seeking new ways to make class time as effective as possible. It's tremendously fulfilling to see someone take what you taught them, apply that on stage, and ultimately succeed in the professional world. In closing, I'd like to discuss what all this means for you, because this lecture has the illusion of being about my career, but it's really about yours. You are very lucky to be in this place, and you have a responsibility and a capacity to cultivate your own artistic resources. What are you going to say? What story will you tell? How do you begin to answer questions like those? Start by using the work of others as a resource. See as much theater as you possibly can. It's fine to like what you see, but it's even better if you don't like it. Why don't you like it? What would you have done to make it better? I think the ability to find shortcomings in the work of others is a crucial step to finding your own voice. I'm not recommending that you adopt a bitter or nasty or judgmental persona. For the most part, you keep your opinions to yourself, but start thinking about attending shows as a theater artist and not just as an audience member. That drive to improve yourself and to improve the work will help guide you on your creative journey. Rodgers and Hammerstein were clear about what they wanted to say in South Pacific, that fear and hatred aren't intrinsic human characteristics, that you've got to be carefully taught to judge people by the color of their skin and not the content of their character, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously said. They believed the musical genre could entertain while carrying a far more powerful message. And when producers fought to cut that song, Rodgers and Hammerstein held to their convictions. The direct connection from oldies like South Pacific to cutting-edge musical theater like Hamilton is clear. Hamilton engages audiences in American history better than many schools, and it provides insight into the state of our current political affairs better than many news outlets. Generously, the producers have committed to bringing 20,000 disadvantaged New York City 11th graders to see the show, and they plan to continue that across the country when the show begins its expected touring life. Hamilton is a perfect example of another fact, that theater has the power to exhilarate, inspire, and transform. When I was a student here, our country was in turmoil and on the precipice of war. Today, we find ourselves in a very similar place, with daily reminders that the world is a dangerous place. How can you connect people? What story can you tell to help us overcome the worst parts of ourselves? When I try to answer that question for myself, and it's not an easy one, I find myself drawn to true stories, to the real lives and the real struggles of the real people we share this planet with. I didn't realize it at the time, but that urge began with the Laramie Project too. In the years that followed, I focused on the art and craft of lighting design. Then I practiced those skills anywhere I could, often without the luxury of feeling a deep personal connection to the work. As my career evolves, I find myself seeking that indescribable tingle of beauty, not only inside the theater, but outside of it as well. Art museums and TED Talks and documentaries and nature are all fertile ground for inspiring performance. I listen to dozens of podcasts that affect the way I view the world. Shows like Radiolab, 99% Invisible, StoryCorps, and This American Life. Last year, I saw a retrospective of the work of James Turrell, a light and space artist. It was the most physical reaction I have ever had to viewing art. The air was thick with pure color, and my breathing changed, my heart rate changed, and I felt dizzy in the best possible way. And that reaction inspired my own idea for a series of art installations with light as a sculptural object that I hope to start exploring soon. I can't pass up this opportunity to acknowledge my parents who are here tonight. And as my dad so wisely said when we moved to Kansas 15 years ago, sometimes you find yourself in the middle of nowhere, and sometimes in the middle of nowhere you find yourself. This falls in the category of advice that's much easier to give than to take, but I don't think you'll have anything meaningful to say unless you strive to inhabit the world as fully as possible. Or, as Jules Fisher put it during the Broadway lighting masterclass, experience life with the intention of experiencing life. That was one of his imperatives, and I'd like to share a few others with you. Make it beautiful. Find the unobvious. Avoid having a style. Inhabit the mind of a director. Take ownership of other people's problems. Stay healthy. And cultivate a deep curiosity of the world and the way light acts in it. Some of you will inevitably choose to make a life for yourself outside the theater. If you do, please know you won't have failed, and your education will not have been a waste. I can't leave you with any final sentiment more perfect than one written by a national conference of educators. Why teach theater in our schools? Theater is a science. Theater is mathematics. Theater is a foreign language. Theater is history. Theater is physical education. Theater is language arts. Theater is art. Theater is business. Theater is technology. Theater is economics. Theater is taught in schools not because one is expected to major in theater, although you are, not because one is expected to perform all through life, not so one can relax, not so one can have fun, but so one will recognize beauty, so one will be sensitive, so one will be closer to an infinite beyond this world, so one will have more love, more compassion, more gentleness, more good, in short, more life. Of what value will it be to make a prosperous living unless you know how to live? That is the reason you are learning theater in school. Thank you very much.
So this is where we open it up to your questions. Ben's with us for as long as it takes. And so please, if you have questions or comments, I think we can all agree that we got our money's worth, right? Yeah. Anybody? Yes.
What were some of your most formative experiences back here at Emporia State, as far as working on shows or in the classroom, or what were some of the ones that changed you or were eye-opening to you?
Well, the first ones that come to mind are the ones where I discovered my limits, where I learned how long I can stay up and work on a project before I have to take a nap on the floor of the drafting room.
Which never happens anymore.
No.
Of course not.
No.
Of course not. I remember on the Laramie project, I remember watching the final run-through in the rehearsal hall next door, and then I remember watching the show again opening night and having seen the leap that made from being in a room under fluorescent lights with the actors to seeing a fully produced piece of theater. And that that was a very important moment of understanding what this experience, this communal experience next door can do and can mean. I remember sitting and having conversations in the lobby of King Hall and being exhausted, but engaging with other students. And our version of student theater when I was here was called IF, Independent Freeform. And I'm still friends with many of the people that I did shows with in that company, and we would find basements and classrooms, and we would do whatever it took to create theater that we felt like was going to give us something that we weren't quite getting from the shows that we were doing in school. But we fought for that, and we took it and we made our own thing. And I also won first place at the Halloween costume contest. The theme was mythical characters, and I was an Oompa Loompa. That might be the winner.
Those aren't real?
What else would we like to talk about? Yeah.
I've been told that you are so well spoken that you are a bit intimidating. So ask you a question.
No, thank you. I try not to be intimidating. So my students, like when I was a student here, all of my professors went by their first names, and I go by my first name at school as well. And when I walk into the office and the staff calls me Professor Pilat, that feels very strange. But I try to engage with my students, and it's important to me that I make, especially lighting design, which sometimes can feel overly complicated, that I make it accessible to students. That's one of my goals.
What steered you toward lighting design?
I did a little bit of everything in high school, and lighting was a bit of it. We got a new light board when I was a high school student, and I helped my theater teacher, who also went to Emporia. I helped set that up when we got it, and we sort of learned together how it operated. And when I was here at Emporia, it was the thing that I felt the strongest connection to. I started as an actor, and I was in a couple of shows here, and I didn't feel drawn to do that for the rest of my life. I appreciate an actor's ability to fully inhabit one character's viewpoint, but I prefer to step back and take the view of a director or a designer and tell the whole story, to see the arc from beginning to end and decide how will we tell this story. One of the questions that I'll ask a director when I'm working on a new show is, at the end of the play, what do we want the audience to think and feel? And what do we want them to be talking about on their drive home? And that will answer a lot of questions about how I approach a show.
Yeah, Logan.
So now that you're teaching, do you think you'll ever go back and design again for like freelance design, like you said? Isn't that something that's going to happen in your future?
Yeah, I still do a little bit of that. This summer I might go back to New York and do an off-Broadway play with some friends of mine, some collaborators that I used to work with. It's usually wise to never say no to anything and to not shut any doors. So I'm going to leave that one open, and who knows where life will take me. We'll see.
Some theater program.
You do. I've heard excellent things about it. Yeah.
You talked just a little bit about doing student productions here at your time here. What's an example of one of your student productions that you put on?
The title of the show was Dead White Men, Dead White Males. Dead white males. Yes. So something like that. It was on the first floor of King Hall. I don't remember the room number, but it's the classroom that's all the way at the end of the hall on the left. And
Art department. Art.
it has the
Yeah.
raised platforms, right? It did, so.
They might have changed it a little bit. Yeah.
So we did that show there, and it was actually set in a classroom. So we were using they were using this found space as well as we could. Every day we would have to take all of the desks out and line them up in a single line all the way down the hallway. And we had my friend Matt Carroll, who is now the head of technical support at Electronic Theater Controls. He was the lighting designer, and I was helping him. I was doing props and a little bit of everything. But he had rigged up clip lights that we clipped up into the drop ceiling, and we had run extension cords through the ceiling. We probably shouldn't have. But we created this theater experience that was in this classroom, and I remember there was an art cart in that show, and I remember gluing little bits of macaroni onto poster board to decorate that and create those props. But I guess what I take away from those experiences is it's hard to collaborate with your professors, because they always, even when they do the best possible job and they make you feel like you are a peer, it's still hard because they'll always be your professors. But when you do theater among yourselves, that's the first time you get to really feel what it's like to collaborate on an even playing field. And you start to develop those relationships. And in my stage management class, we talk about how do you develop confidence when you haven't done something yet, when you're still in that phase of learning and exploring, but you know you need to be confident, but you're not yet. I think doing those kinds of student shows are the perfect way to start, because you usually you have far more skills than you think, and you just need to give yourself the opportunity to prove to yourself that you know what you're doing.
Didn't you do a part to drive? Were you here when they did that?
Yeah.
Where was that?
It was up in where you were today.
The old Five Neely Theater. Was that still?
Probably.
That's not ringing a bell, so I have to
I think it
imagine.
was the year before it
Yeah.
came, because
Yeah.
we did Philomena.
Yeah.
I remember trying to acquire 100 folding chairs to load into someone's basement.
Yeah. John Henningson's?
I think it was John Henningson's
Yeah.
basement, yeah. But I don't remember much else about that show.
And did you do Betrayal in someone's second floor, and it was down here, like on Merchant Street? It was a rental house, and I don't know if the landlords knew it was happening. 50 people loaded into someone's living room rental. But yeah, it was.
So that idea doesn't go away. Some of my best friends in New York were part of a theater company that did the same thing, only on a slightly bigger scale. They rented an apartment, a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment in Manhattan that was used as an artist live and workspace. And they created a series of shows that were donation only, pay what you can. And you would come, and the cast would greet you, and they would change this apartment. Again, the landlords didn't know. They would change the apartment around in a different way every time, and it would be in the round or this kind of communal space where you'd all sit on pillows along 2 sides of the room. The cast would greet you and would serve you dinner. You would watch the first act, and then during intermission, the cast would come and mingle, and then they would serve you dessert, and you would watch the second act. And it felt like something special was happening, and the work that they did was amazing. So the best theater is not necessarily happening in a theater or in a commercial setting. I'll add that 2 weeks from now in Los Angeles, I'm going to see one of my good friends, and she graduated from here. She's in a site-specific play that takes place in a kitchen, and only 10 or 12 people can see each performance. And she's not one to brag about her work or to overstate what she's doing, but she says she's so excited about this and said that something really special is going on with this play that they're creating, and I'm excited to see that. So the kinds of things that you're doing in basements and classrooms, that doesn't stop, and don't let it stop.
Rochelle?
What were some of the biggest differences in design work between the educational setting and the professional setting? And how do those work for you?
I would say time and labor. You have a tremendous blessing in college, which is you're still learning, and you have the time to process that information. None of your professors are expecting you to work quickly. They would I think much rather prefer that you take the time, that you learn the steps, that you get that right. This is where you learn how to do theater. When you get into the professional world, sometimes you get told no. We can't have a notes call tomorrow morning. You're going to have to wait a day. You have to collect some of your focus notes until it's worth it, because we have to hire at least 4 crew members for a minimum of 4 hours. So in the professional world, labor costs money, and educational theater has the benefit of you are all free labor all the time, for the most part. But there is this expectation of speed, and there is this financial pressure. That's one of the biggest differences. The work, the shows stay the same for the most part. You get better at doing that, but the work is kind of always the work. The television lighting designer that I used to work for, he used to work for New York City Lights, and then he founded his own company. And we would talk on breaks, and he would say, I wish it was back in the good old days when all I had to do was light the show. Now he has to light the show, but that's such a small component of his job of managing new projects and running a business and taxes and being a manager and hiring and owning or renting studio space. He has all of these other business owner responsibilities that take him away from just lighting the show. And that's sort of the advantage that you have as a student, is that you get to focus on just doing the thing, whether it's lighting the show, stage managing, costume designing, working on props. Whatever it is that you're doing, you have the luxury of focusing on that. And you don't really get that back. So use that to the best of to the best advantage that you can. And we were talking about this earlier. Even if your job on a show is just pushing a button, ask what happens when you push that button. Ask why you're pushing that button. Ask what the button next to it does. Take all of those opportunities to learn more about what's around you, as opposed to just, well, I've met my requirements, I did what was expected of me, and I'm going to be on my way. Because just doing what's expected of you is not the way to better yourself and create better work.
Why did you decide to move from designing professionally to the university?
I always enjoyed teaching. Even when I was here, I took the lighting design class. the year before I graduated, and then I was a TA for my last year. So I got the experience of helping Ron teach that class, and I would circulate and float around, and I would help answer some questions, and I really enjoyed that. When I was in grad school, part of my assistantship was teaching a Vectorworks class, a computer drafting class, and also teaching, along with a scenic designer and a costume designer and a sound designer, I co-taught an introduction to design course to first-year undergraduate students. And both of those teaching experiences were great. And when I was an intern one summer, while I was a student at ESU, I interned at Pioneer Valley Summer Theater in Northampton, Massachusetts. And I was a lighting design intern, and there was a group of high school apprentices who were interested in technical theater. And one week, they would have a series of classes every week, and one week I did a class on lighting design, and I brought them all up to the light board, which is the same one that you have in the light lab, and we wrote, each of them got to write an effect, a chase, and they got to see lights flashing in fun, cool ways because of what they did, and they learned how to do that. All of those things are pretty rewarding experiences, to see somebody learn something new and then take it and then sort of go on from there. I always knew that I wanted to teach eventually, but after living in New York for 4 or 5 years and working in that environment, and it's very high stress, and it's amazing, but it's a lot of work, and it consumes your life. And I felt like I was ready to start. I now had those experiences. It was important to me to be, in order to be the best teacher that I could, to have those experiences, to be able to tell students what it's like, to be able to connect them to people who are working today and internships and other resources. So I felt like I had gotten to a point where I was ready to make that leap.
How did you end up taking stage management too?
So we, like Emporia State, so the theater program at Pepperdine is of a similar size, and everybody has to do a little bit of everything. I worked with some fantastic stage managers when I was an assistant lighting designer, and I called follow spots, and I was in that world to an extent. I guess the short answer is I'm not a sound designer, and I needed to take on some of that other management and other courses, and that was the right fit. When Pepperdine hired me, and many schools, they prefer that lighting designers also be sound designers, and that was hard for me, because when I was in grad school and I asked my mentor, I said, should I take a sound design course? His answer was that the artist in him said no, because those jobs, they're very different. Despite the fact that they both deal with computers and intangible mediums, they're very different. So the artist in him said, those jobs are both important enough and hard enough that you can really only do one really well. And I never did end up taking much sound design. And now that I'm the production manager at Pepperdine, I'm having to go back and teach myself more about that, so that I can be ordering mics and helping to maintain that inventory and deciding what are the spending priorities in the department, what has to get upgraded next, those sorts of things. But like the program here, and it's like the program at Pepperdine, we want you to be able to do a little bit of everything. And I think being a good stage manager, there is no better job or no better example of a job where you have to be excellent at everything.
Ben, I think it's of great benefit to hear about your successes and doing the work and making the art, and I feel like it's also of great benefit to perhaps hear about the low times, the low ebbs, the times in between the jobs or the times when you're in the 3-figure, range before you move to the 4-figure range, and maybe you're in New York or another city, and what you're doing to survive and get to the next job and what those times are like?
Yeah. Still, almost, there is a moment on almost every show that I do where we've made that leap from the design has been almost entirely in my head. I'll communicate with directors with words and images and research, but ultimately there's a long period of time when I'm working on a show where I see light cues in my head, and my job is to try to communicate them to other people. And my job is to draft a light plot that's going to let me create those light cues. And there's always a moment in that leap from a light plot, we've now hung all the lights, we're now turning them on for focus. And I think this is not gonna work. This is the show that I've totally screwed up. This is a problem. It's different every time, whatever the specific issue is, but it doesn't look right when you start. And it's this process of filtering down and of getting there, and I have to stop, and I have to remind myself, it'll be okay. I have all of the resources I need. I don't know what I need to do yet, but if I stop and I think about it, I have the skills I need. And I can take a deep breath and I can think, okay, well, I have a problem. What do I need to do to solve it? I can move this, I can change the color, I can fix this or that. And it's always a solvable problem. But I think many lighting designers tend to be high-strung individuals. And it is terrifying sometimes to be a lighting designer. And if that ever goes away, I'll let you know, but it hasn't yet. In terms of career, there was one summer I had done a lot of summer theater for a number of years, and it's a pretty grueling experience sometimes, as you probably know. I needed a break, and so I did two things that summer. One, I took some time for me because I had spent so much time doing theater. I applied to be a cheese cave intern at Murray's Cheese Shop in Manhattan, and they have these 3 underground cheese caves where they bring in cheese and they age it. They have a store on the top floor, and then they have a second floor, which is a classroom where they have cheese and wine pairing, cheese and honey pairing, cheese and whiskey pairing, the history and geography of cheese. I got to take all of these classes for free, and so I was continuing my education in something that I really enjoyed. And while I did that, I worked at New York Theater Workshop, which was a theater where I had assisted a couple of times, but I worked in their telemarketing office in the basement. And for a summer, I called people and I tried to get them to buy season subscriptions to the shows they were doing. And that, it was a break that I needed. I would always be wondering what the next job would be. It would always be exciting to get emails because you never know which one is going to be the offer of the next job. There aren't a lot of neighborhoods in Manhattan where artists can afford to live. I was in Washington Heights, which was up at the very, very top, 173rd and Broadway. I remember taking my piles of laundry on my one day off and loading them up in a cart, in my old lady push cart, and getting it, hopefully the elevator was working that day, and I would push it into the elevator and go down and walk around the corner, and I would put all my laundry into the laundromat, and then while that was working, I would go to the grocery store, which was a 5-block walk away, and I would lug my groceries for the week back up to my apartment. It can be exhausting. You don't always know where the next paycheck is coming from, what the next show is, but if you hang in there, sometimes it all works out.
I think we got time for another question, and then we'll give another sign of our appreciation and call it a lovely evening. Is there a final question?
I have a question.
Well,
And this has to do a little bit about what we were talking to you at dinner yesterday, and that is, you had a beautiful consensus of what theater can do and how it can open worlds and culture and all kinds of things, yet you're in a program where you have to have challenges about censorship and what you do and present, and how you feel about that, or perhaps some instances that you had to juggle and perhaps were the better for it, or...
Yeah, so as I was saying, so Pepperdine is a Christian institution, and that means there are some shows that we just won't do. And we're never, we hold, in the theater department, we hold ourselves to a high standard, and we're never censored, and we never, when we commit to doing a show, the contract that we sign with the organization that holds the rights to that show, we agree that we won't change language without the permission of the playwright or of the organization holding the rights. So we exercise some discretion in the shows that we do. What we can't do is a pretty small percentage of the stories that we can tell. So we mostly focus our attention on what we can do and not what we can't. But there is a time and a place and a venue for every kind of show. And Los Angeles is a big theater town, and our students graduate and they are exposed to all sorts of different things. One theater department can't give everyone everything. But we can certainly connect them with the resources and the opportunities that are out there in the professional world to explore the kinds of things that excite them as artists. I'll also add that we have a directing program at Pepperdine, and students will present a directing thesis, and there is a lot more flexibility in what the students choose to present as opposed to what is presented as part of the main stage season to donors and the larger Pepperdine community. So students will sometimes explore those sort of exciting, edgier works in that student-directed venue as well.
once again, let's give Ben